Nobody can read this book, not historians, not linguists, not even some of the greatest codebreakers who ever lived. For more than 600 years, its pages have resisted every attempt to understand them. And despite all our technology, all our computers, and generations of brilliant minds, nobody can say with certainty what this book actually says. Which raises an unsettling question. How can a book survive for centuries and still remain unread? This is the story of the Voynich Manuscript, and before this investigation is over, you'll understand why some people consider it history's greatest unsolved puzzle. Because the deeper researchers looked, the stranger things became. The story begins in 1912. A Polish book dealer named Wilfrid Voynich had travelled to Italy. He was searching for rare books and manuscripts, something he had spent much of his life doing. At the time, the Jesuits who occupied Villa Mondragone, a centuries-old college near Rome, were quietly selling parts of their collection. Among hundreds of old volumes, one object immediately stood out. It wasn't because of its cover, or because it appeared especially valuable. It was because nothing inside made any sense. Every page was covered in strange symbols, symbols that resembled no known alphabet. The illustrations were equally bizarre, plants that looked familiar but not quite, circular diagrams filled with stars and strange markings, fold-out pages unlike those found in ordinary medieval books, and perhaps most strangely of all, dozens of small female figures standing or bathing inside interconnected pools filled with green liquid. Nobody had ever seen anything quite like it. Voynich purchased the manuscript. But what he didn't know was that over a century later, experts would still be arguing over what exactly he had discovered. At first, many believed the mystery wouldn't last long. Surely someone would recognize the language. Surely some historian would identify the plants. Surely a forgotten cipher would eventually be cracked. But year after year, decade after decade, nothing. And as researchers began studying the manuscript more closely, they discovered something unexpected. The book wasn't simply strange, it was structured. The symbols repeated in patterns. Words appeared again and again. Certain characters occurred more frequently than others. It behaved like a real language, but no one could identify which language. And that's when the mystery truly began. Because random nonsense isn't supposed to look organized. Yet this did. The manuscript itself contains more than 200 pages, though researchers believe several pages are missing. Over time, scholars divided it into different sections based on the illustrations. The first section appears botanical. And that's where things become confusing. Many of the drawings seem to depict plants, but none of them can be confidently identified. Some resemble sunflowers, others look vaguely like lilies or herbs, but every attempt to match them to real species has run into the same problem. The details don't quite fit. It's almost as if the artist combined multiple plants together, or perhaps drew species that no longer exist. Or maybe they weren't intended to represent plants at all. Nobody knows. The next section appears astronomical. Its pages contain stars, moons, suns, and circular diagrams. Several illustrations include symbols associated with zodiac signs. Pisces, Taurus, Sagittarius, which suggests that whoever created the manuscript possessed at least some knowledge of astrology or astronomy, but even these images raise questions, because their arrangement doesn't perfectly match known traditions. Once again, the manuscript offers clues, but never clear answers. And then there's the section that has fascinated and puzzled researchers for decades. page after page depicts small women, many unclothed, standing inside strange pools connected by elaborate tubes. Some appear to be holding objects, others seem to be interacting with a flowing liquid. At first glance, the illustrations almost resemble plumbing diagrams, or perhaps something medical, maybe symbolic, maybe alchemical, but no interpretation has gained universal acceptance. And that's a phrase you'll hear again and again throughout this story. No interpretation has gained universal acceptance, because every time researchers think they have solved one mystery, another question appears. But perhaps the biggest surprise came from science. For years, skeptics wondered whether the manuscript was simply an elaborate hoax. After all, history is filled with forgeries. Maybe someone created it to fool wealthy collectors. Maybe the entire thing was a practical joke. It certainly wouldn't be the first time. But in 2009, researchers used radiocarbon dating to analyse the parchment. And the results changed everything. The material used to create the manuscript dated back to the early 15th century, somewhere between 1404 and 1438. In other words, whatever this book was, it wasn't modern, it wasn't created in the 19th century, and it wasn't invented after Wilfrid Voynich found it. The parchment itself had existed for roughly 600 years. Suddenly, the hoax theory became much harder to explain, because creating a fake manuscript is one thing. Creating a fake manuscript using centuries-old parchment, complete with hundreds of pages of carefully organised symbols and illustrations, that's something else entirely. And there was another discovery. The ink appeared consistent with the manuscript's age, which meant the text and drawings had likely been added around the same period. Whoever created this book wasn't playing a joke on modern historians. They were writing for someone. But who? And why? Was it a scientific work? A medical encyclopedia? An encoded message? A lost language? Or something far stranger? As decades passed, experts from around the world attempted to solve the mystery. Linguists searched for similarities to known languages. Historians compared its illustrations with medieval texts. Cryptographers examined the strange symbols. Computer scientists analysed patterns hidden within the words. Again and again, researchers announced breakthroughs, and again, other experts disagreed. One theory would emerge, another would tear it apart, and the manuscript remained silent. Yet perhaps the most fascinating detail of all is that the text itself doesn't behave like nonsense. Modern statistical analysis shows something extraordinary. Word frequencies follow patterns commonly found in real languages. Certain words appear only in specific sections. Some words rarely appear together. Others repeat in ways that resemble grammar. Random gibberish shouldn't do that, and yet this manuscript does. Which means one of two things must be true. Either this book contains genuine information written in a system nobody has yet understood, or someone 600 years ago created one of the most sophisticated and convincing hoaxes in history. And if that's true, why? What would be the purpose? Who was the intended audience? And how could a single individual create something so complex centuries before modern cryptography even existed? Those questions alone would be enough to make the Voynich Manuscript one of history's greatest mysteries. But the story doesn't end there, because during the 20th century, one of the greatest codebreakers who ever lived became obsessed with the manuscript. And despite helping break enemy codes during wartime, even he couldn't solve it, and that's where this story becomes even stranger. That man was William Friedman, and if anyone was qualified to solve the Voynich Manuscript, it was him. During the Second World War, Friedman played a crucial role in breaking Japanese military codes. He was considered one of the greatest cryptographers of the 20th century. Entire teams worked under him. Complex ciphers that once seemed impossible eventually gave way to careful analysis and patience. So when Friedman turned his attention to the Voynich Manuscript, many believed the mystery's days were numbered. Surely, if anyone could decipher it, he could. But years passed, then decades, and despite assembling some of the brightest minds available, Friedman failed. Not because he lacked intelligence, not because he lacked resources, but because the manuscript seemed to obey rules unlike anything they had encountered before. Eventually, even Friedman himself admitted that the solution remained beyond reach. And that should tell you something, because if one of history's greatest codebreakers couldn't solve it, what exactly were they looking at? A language? A code? Or something else entirely? Since then, countless researchers have attempted to finish what Friedman started. And with the arrival of computers and artificial intelligence, many believed the answer was finally within reach. Modern software has analysed the frequency of symbols, the distribution of words, the relationship between characters, patterns invisible to the human eye. And surprisingly, these studies revealed something fascinating. The text behaves very much like natural language. Not random nonsense, not meaningless symbols, but something structured, something deliberate. Some studies have even suggested that the manuscript follows statistical patterns similar to languages used around the world, which only deepens the mystery. Because if it really was a language, where are the people who spoke it? And why has no other example ever been found? Over the years, several major theories have emerged, and each one seems convincing, at least at first. The first theory proposes that the manuscript records a real language that has simply been lost. History is filled with languages that disappeared. Entire civilizations have vanished. Records have been destroyed. Libraries have burned. Perhaps the creators of the manuscript belonged to a community whose knowledge did not survive. It's certainly possible. But critics point out an important problem. Languages rarely disappear without leaving behind traces, inscriptions, letters, fragments. Yet no other document resembling the Voynich Manuscript has ever been discovered. Not one. Which leads to another theory. Perhaps the manuscript is encrypted. Maybe the strange symbols conceal ordinary words hidden beneath layers of code. After all, ciphers existed long before modern cryptography. Kings, diplomats, and scholars often protected sensitive information. Some researchers believe the manuscript could represent a sophisticated encryption system, but if that's true, the code has outlived generations of experts, and no one has found the key. Then there are those who believe the manuscript may be medical in nature. The illustrations of plants, the strange bathing scenes, the astronomical symbols. Some historians suggest these pages could represent treatments, remedies, or theories about the human body based on medieval ideas. But again, certainty remains elusive, because the plants themselves don't match known species, and many of the diagrams refuse to fit neatly into established categories. Others have proposed connections to alchemy. During the Middle Ages, alchemists often used strange imagery and symbolic language. Some researchers argue that the manuscript's bizarre illustrations may have held meaning only for a small group of initiates, but there is little direct evidence to support this. And then there is perhaps the most controversial theory of all. What if the entire manuscript is a hoax? What if someone created hundreds of pages of meaningless text simply to deceive wealthy collectors? At first, that sounds ridiculous, But history has seen stranger frauds. Still, skeptics face a serious problem. The manuscript contains over 200 pages, thousands upon thousands of carefully arranged symbols, complex patterns, repeated structures, section-specific vocabulary. Creating something so detailed would have required enormous effort. And if it was a hoax, why? Who was supposed to be fooled? And more importantly, how did someone create such convincing linguistic patterns centuries before modern statistical analysis even existed? Ironically, the hoax theory raises almost as many questions as the manuscript itself. Now here's something I'd love to hear from you. If you've made it this far, let me know in the comments. Do you think the Voynich Manuscript contains genuine knowledge? Or do you think it was an elaborate deception? I'm curious to see which theory you find most convincing, because even experts remain divided, and perhaps that's why this mystery has endured for so long. Every answer seems to create new questions, and despite all our technological advances, the manuscript continues to resist explanation. Today, the original manuscript resides in the Beinecker Rare Book and Manuscript Library at Yale University. Anyone can view its digitized pages. Researchers continue to study it. New theories appear almost every year. Some claim breakthroughs, others challenge them, but no explanation has achieved universal acceptance. And perhaps that's the most remarkable part of this story. Not that we haven't solved it, but that 6 centuries have passed. Empires have risen and fallen. Wars have been fought. Entire scientific revolutions have transformed the world. Human beings have split the atom, walked on the moon, created artificial intelligence. Yet somewhere among these pages, a mystery remains untouched. Think about that. The person who wrote this manuscript lived in a completely different world. They never saw electricity, never imagined airplanes, never dreamed of computers, and yet the symbols they placed on parchment more than 600 years ago still confront us with the same question. What does this mean? Perhaps one day the answer will emerge. Maybe another forgotten manuscript will be discovered. Maybe advances in artificial intelligence will uncover patterns nobody has noticed before. Or maybe the key has already been lost forever, buried alongside the people who once understood it. And that possibility might be the most unsettling of all, because not every mystery ends with an answer. Sometimes the people who held those answers disappear. Sometimes knowledge vanishes. And sometimes history leaves behind fragments without explanations. The Voynich Manuscript may represent one of those fragments, a voice from the past, still speaking, yet no longer understood, and perhaps that's why it continues to fascinate us. Not because it proves some grand conspiracy, not because it rewrites history, but because it reminds us how much we still don't know. How many stories have been lost, how many records have disappeared, and how easily knowledge itself can fade with time. 600 years ago, someone sat down and carefully filled these pages. They had a purpose, they had intentions, they understood every symbol they wrote. To them, this book made perfect sense, but today their meaning remains hidden, waiting, silent, unclaimed, and maybe that's what makes the Voynich Manuscript so extraordinary. Not that nobody can read it, but that someone once could, and now that understanding is gone. For now, the mystery remains, but there are many more forgotten stories, many more unexplained records, and many more unanswered questions hiding in the gaps of history. So if you enjoy investigations like this, and you want to explore the mysteries history left behind, consider subscribing to the Vanished Index, because some records don't disappear, they simply go unclaimed. And somewhere out there, another mystery is waiting to be found.